Now, today we're going to deal with a group of people in our lives who typically don't get a lot of attention in astrology, and those people are friends. So, as an astrologer, I actually do get quite a lot of consultation enquiries that are regarding friendships. So, of course, there are the usual questions about friends who might have some kind of disagreement, but we also have cases where friends go into business together. And sometimes when changes happen in the business, it's not really a monetary or business decision that gets people really stressed up, but more about the fact that we could potentially have a friendship at stake. Now, sometimes I have clients and also students who are really afraid to leave the jobs. So, for example, they may not resonate with their work anymore, but they might say things like, actually, I don't really care for the job anymore, but I'm really staying for my colleagues. It's a great environment. I just don't want to leave these people, although I really, really hate the job. And in some cases, we've got people who are afraid to leave, say, social clubs or certain groups that you belong to. You might not believe in the cause anymore, but then you decide not to leave because you're really afraid to sort of alienate your social groups. Now, in some cases, I've also found that this can be a bit of a difficult trend, especially as there are people who are also afraid to embrace the next stage of life. So, for example, if you have a group of friends who are all singles, and everybody gets together because we resonate and we have the same challenges being single and how to date. And sometimes you get that one person who gets into a relationship. So you get a new boyfriend. And it's quite difficult sometimes because there's that fear that, okay, so if I have a boyfriend, does that mean that the rest of the group is going to find that I'm like the weird one? Or you no longer resonate with the challenges that we are facing? Or you got people who might be with a lot of child-free people, and then if you decide that you want to go be a parent, for example, to suddenly have cares and concerns regarding a new child, a new baby in your life, and to worry that perhaps this is going to put a barrier between you and friends. And the list goes on. There are people who are afraid to embrace overseas opportunities because then all your friends and your social circle are back in your home country. And so, which is why today we want to take a deep dive into friendships, what kind of role it plays in our lives, and also to sort of touch on some of the challenges that regular people face in their lives and perhaps what astrology might be able to help us along with. So next, of course, I want to talk about what astrology says about friendships. Now, in astrology, there are 12 houses, of which number 11th, the 11th house typically deals with things like friends, communities, society, social groups, and that kind of thing. So this is what most people are familiar with. But today, I want to expand on this a little bit and to talk about some of the themes associated with the 11th house that get very little attention. So trust me, if you go online and you search 11th house, some of these stuff, it doesn't really come up. But I do teach it in my classes, and I also want to take the opportunity to explain how it ties in with the idea of friends and communities. So one of the themes to do with astrology is this thing called future plans. And for a lot of people, it's very confusing, right? Because if you say, this is how you deal with future plans in your life, it's kind of hard to contextualize. But maybe I can help by explaining that for most of us, if you look at all the friends you've ever had in your life, now think about how many of these people are kind of like institutional friends. So you go to school, and then there are all these people who are your classmates. And maybe you enlist in the military, in some shape or form. And then there are all these guys that you're sharing a room and a bathroom with, and you go on missions with. So they kind of become your friends for a period of time. And throughout your adult life, you might work in several projects, in different types of working environments, your colleagues, your project mates. And again, these are institutional friends that you meet along the way. If you're single, you have a group of people you hang out with when you're single. When you become a parent, then you hang out with people who are other parents too. So my point being here is that if you trace the development of friendships, it also traces how you have developed as a person. So whenever you take on like a new stage of life, it sort of comes with a new social circle and a new community. So in that sense, friends are also a bit of a symbol and a reflection of where a person generally is in their life at any given state of time. So what this means is that as you move from one stage to the other, one of the challenges that understandably comes up is that it can be a bit hard to fit people from the previous stage of life into your new stage of life. So when you have friends at school, and you know how everybody gets together because we are going to classes together, we need someone to have lunch with in between classes, but you know everyone graduates, and then you go to different industries and you have different types of jobs, different types of lifestyles, and it's really quite common that school friends don't keep in contact after a while. So that's something that we experience as we go along, and that's why the 11th house is about future plans. Now, there is another major theme to deal with the 11th house that I think gets so little attention, and the second one is about social causes. So, of course, sometimes this refers to like major causes, like humanitarian causes, or something you want to see changed or fixed in the world, but it doesn't have to be so complicated. So it could be maybe you love basketball, and there's this group of people that you meet every Saturday morning just to play basketball with. And there are people who do things like beach cleanups. You might also have a community that deals with healing or sound healing. Maybe you care about mental health. You care about things that are, say, equal pay for the disadvantaged. So there are all kinds of things that we care about, and it's outside of things that you do professionally in your work. So it's more about you as a person and what's important to you. So the 11th house also deals with the communities and the groups and the friends that you hang out with as a consequence of your involvement with causes that you care about in life. And next, we want to talk about why this change in social community scares so many people. Now, especially in your adult life, where a lot of people say it's easier to make friends when you are younger and you're in school, and it's so much more difficult to do this as adults. Now, one of the theories that I'm working on here is that because we hang out with people who reflect not just the activities, but also the beliefs and the values and the similar challenges that you're facing in life at any one stage. So when you move from one stage to the other, and sometimes when friendships sort of fade off or they sort of drop off in the background, it scares people. And this kind of conflict can range to the very extreme, where people become hypersensitive to the fact that I no longer care about the same things as you do. So and a good example is when you leave school, and sometimes people get really involved in their jobs, for example, which could be in a specific industry that is very different from your classmates. So when you meet up with them, you become hypersensitive to the fact that people have different values and perspectives as yours. So it can come as extreme as people actually disagreeing and having conflict with each other, but more often than not, it's actually not so obvious. So people just sort of fade off, they just contact each other less, we just don't text each other that much anymore, until before you know it, a year goes by and you just really haven't been in touch with that person throughout all this time. Now, this whole process of losing friends is a very scary prospect for a lot of people. And I feel, from what I've observed among clients and students, is that the reaction here is we think it is an emotional rejection of each other. So the idea being that, I don't think my friend wants to be friends with me anymore. But quite often, if you dig below the surface, what happens is that when we hang out with our friends, it's like seeing a type of belief or value that is reflected back at us. Now, if you or the other party has sort of moved on to a different stage of life, and sometimes you feel like the resonance is no longer there. So what I want to suggest here is that what scares people is that sometimes it scares you how quickly either yourself or another person can really develop in life. It's almost like I don't see you for 6 months, and it's like you've developed a whole new perspective on life. And I think what scares people is how much humans can grow very, very quickly in a short span of time. And also that the feeling of rejection is actually not of an emotional rejection. It's not like I don't like you anymore, I don't want to be a friend anymore, but it's a recognition that, okay, we kind of have a different perspective right now, and any kind of rejection that's being felt is actually on the perspective and not necessarily on the person themselves. So, okay, major question here. So does that mean that if you move to a different stage of life, then all your friendships from the past are doomed? So obviously the answer is no. And while it can mean that some of your priorities and some of the things in the major happenings in your life could be very different from your friends, the truth is that doesn't mean that you can't still share the same hobby, And I know of people who still get together with old school friends to maintain some old school traditions, for example, and you can still fight for the same causes. If you really care for kayaking, or if you care about, say, Indian culture, or getting together with friends at Hari Raya, that's absolutely still possible, even if you have very different lives apart from the things that you care about when you get together. There are people who still love movies and they still meet up with friends with very different lives just to catch a movie every now and then, or watch a soccer game. So I guess to wrap up on this topic, it's that in my studies in astrology for all these years, the 11th house is one of 12 houses, one of 12 areas of life. But in my opinion, it's one of the areas of life that get almost no attention at all. We spend all this time talking about money and career and love relationships, but friendships actually play this sort of low-key important role in people's lives. And you really only notice it when you suddenly have no more friends. So that's something that we really want to pay attention to, because the loneliness epidemic is something that affects people. And if we don't talk about it, it gets to a point where people don't really know what to do about it after. And this also means that as friendships become harder and harder to maintain, then you find people get very sentimental. And it seems that 2 or 3 friends that you have become so precious. And sometimes it means that people hang on to relationships that have outlived their usefulness, their utility. And it means that people find themselves having to squeeze a square peg in a round hole just to make a friendship continue, especially for those that probably really shouldn't. And that scarcity mindset actually comes from the fear that we aren't going to get new ones. It's almost as if people have forgotten how to make friends. And also, even scarier is that outside of work and outside of family, people don't seem to have a cause or hobbies that you engage in, is completely voluntary, that you don't have to do. And that part of life is slowly disappearing from lots of people's lives. So it's really, really good that we sort of pay attention to this and really actively deal with that. And whatever crazy shit you're into, don't worry, some people in the world are into the exact same crazy shit. So with a minimal effort, you will find your tribe. And so my last message here is to people who are into, of course, something that I care a lot about, which is astrology. So it's one of those things that my students are sometimes embarrassed to tell their friends that they're into astro because it's woo-woo and it's mystical. But I hope you like our style of approaching astrology in a very practical way, in ways that it's easy for people to learn it properly and to apply it and to use it in a very applicable way in life. So if you're looking for a group of people who can do that with you, then I invite you to actually join us in our classes. So where we give students a very strong foundation in astrology, and you also find like-minded people who are actively using astrology to help their communities, help people get to know themselves, and to build a much more purposeful life. So links are in our description. You can find out how to get involved in our activities. So I'll catch you guys in the next video.